Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on the X-Rite MetaVue, now compatible with Benjamin Moore COLORx Software. We have three presenters with us today. From X-Rite, our application specialists, we have Tim O'Rourke and Jason Hedgecock. And then from Benjamin Moore, we have application specialist Harry Burek. I'm Amanda Carter, the North American Marketing and Lead Generation Manager here at X-Rite. I'll be moderating today's webinar. A few things to go over before we get started. Due to the number of people that are attending today's webinar, we will keep everyone muted. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please use the questions function on the GoToWebinar panel. We'll have some time at the end to answer a few questions. If we don't get to yours, then we'll have someone follow up with you. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and you'll receive a link so you can review the webinar at your convenience. I'll now turn it over to Tim and Jason and Harry.
Thanks, Amanda. And we appreciate everybody's time and joining us on the webinar to talk about the MetaVue and then also discuss tips and tricks inside of Benjamin Moore's COLORx software. We're excited at MatchRite, X-Rite to really come out with instrumentation that for us is really, in my 24 years, and that's how long I've been with X-Rite, we've got a real winner. Jason, how long you been with X-Rite?
16 years.
Okay, and Harry, how long you been with Benjamin Moore?
34 years.
34. Well, that's awesome. So, from our standpoint, we're the technical support that when you call in and things aren't working or not matching or the instrument's not connecting, we're the ones that get you back up and running, so to say. But we're here also to talk about the new MetaVue instrument. If you go back in time, we've been partnered with Benjamin Moore since about 2004 is when the COLORx software came out. But we've been making instruments for ourselves since the 50s. But color measurement instruments, we really have three that have worked with the COLORx software. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of jump out to a screen here, which is our, let me get that, see if that focuses in, or there we go. So we've got three different instruments that you'll see there. The one to the right, that's our old CF57. That was the one we came out with back in the early 2000s. And then in 2008, we came out with the iVue. And then in 2018, we came out with the MetaVue. And so one of the things we'll do inside the webinar today is we can do what's called a poll question. And so what we'll do now is we'll just kind of throw out a question for you to answer. What instruments are you currently using? And if you can remember what the instruments were, the CF57, the iVue, or the MetaVue, that kind of helps us in this webinar, which way do we want to go, or is there people that have the old instrumentation? So go ahead and just click on the one that you have. And if you're not sure, not a problem either. There's no wrong answers here. But these are the three that we've had for many years, and that's something we're proud of. It's not we come out with new instruments all the time. Okay, so in this case here, we've got good answers back. It seems like we've got people on the webinar with all three of the different instrumentation. So that's great. We'll kind of keep ourselves centered that way and do some software and tips and tricks for sure. So with that, the instrument that we want to focus on is the MetaVue. And again, this is our newest line of instrumentation. It's an imaging spectral photometer. So we'll show and talk about what does that mean. One of the first things I'll do is I'll talk about connecting the instrument and going through calibration and cleaning with the MetaVue. So those of you that have that, here's a good time to listen in. Those of you that don't, it's quite simple in the way that it works. And so I'll have Jason talk about calibration with the instrument.
Okay, so obviously we have multiple different instruments, and over the years we've changed how calibration actually works. So with the older CF instruments, you had to remove the gray cap, put it up, open it. There was a lot of moving parts. The iVue kind of introduced the new rail system and you had to slide it forward and back. What we found out from a lot of people is either it was dirty or there was a lot of moving parts and it was hard to clean. So with that in mind, we actually created, the MetaVue has a similar rail system to the iView, but it's a lot easier to kind of manipulate. I'm going to have Tim be my Vanna here and
we go back to the
take a look at the camera.
Sure.
So one of the first things was people didn't know if their instrument was calibrated, and it was always kind of a pain when they'd walk up to the instrument, get ready to take a measurement for a customer, and the first thing it did was prompt that it wanted to be calibrated. So as you can see, we added this lovely little indicator light. When it's red, it needs to be calibrated. In the COLORx software, the MetaVue needs to calibrate once a day. So with that, what we did is actually create a rail system on the bottom. We have this little lip here. You can pull it forward to the white in there.
Do that again, Jason.
Okay, let's slide it back in. And so it's just a quick little, grip the fingers on this little piece, it slides forward. The instrument will know where it's at, we'll show that in a second. And then for cleaning, while I got the camera, I'm gonna show this. This piece actually can slide all the way in so you can get into the lenses. There's actually 5 of them under there to clean. So you're not having to blow canned air in, move caps, do all that stuff. It's one quick little rail system that gets in there to calibrate it. So I'm going to slide it forward and we'll flip back over to the COLORx software so you can kind of see what we see in the software. So right now, obviously the camera, you can see exactly where we're at. We're aimed at the mat. I can lift this up and put it over the table. You can see kind of what's underneath there. So with this, obviously you want to make sure we're in the right spot. So as you can see above the camera picture, the measurement button is grayed out. I'm going to pull it forward and you'll see actually it move on the screen to snap in. Once it snaps into the proper spot, you'll see the measurement button actually lights up so you can use it. If you're not in the right spot or it was extremely dirty, it will not allow you to actually do the measurement. So being in the correct spot with a clean white tile, we know we're good to calibrate. So Tim actually measures it. You'll see the instrument flash a few times as it's going through. So this is a great opportunity to look to see if it's dirty. If you see on the screen smudges, lines, dirt, dust, debris, just take those alcohol wipes, you can get them at any CVS, Walgreens, and you can wipe those lenses in the white tile. The second part of the calibration is obviously, as Tim said, this is an imaging device. So we actually have a camera on board. We got to calibrate the camera. So the piece I'm going to slide in now is the second piece. What we'll do is we'll flip over to the camera again. I want Tim to kind of demonstrate. We're going to show you what we're actually seeing on here. He's going to grab the pen. So on this device, there's actually these white tabs. This is what the camera is looking for. So again, we want to make sure those remain clean. And when it's in the proper position, that'll highlight the actual spot and say it's able to be measured.
Yeah, if there's any kind of paint, in fact, in my early testing, I took a Sharpie and just made a mark on one of those tabs, and the measure button would not appear. And so that's probably the one thing we're finding with this instrument is somebody gets some paint on those, what I call east-west tabs. The measure button does not appear even though you know you're locked in place. Again, keep that clean.
So then Tim's going to actually hit measure. And when this is done, we'll show you the light right there on the front of it is green. So it's kind of easy as you walk around the department. Maybe you haven't had anybody in there right away. You walk by, you see that light's red. Perfect time to calibrate. Takes about 30 seconds total.
Yeah. Or in the morning when you've got to purge your dispenser, just take the 42 seconds to calibrate the instrument and you're good to go.
I'll show you the green light and then I'm going to throw it back to Tim.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
There it is.
And we're green, so we're good to go.
So now what I'll do is we'll kind of, let's get into some measurement techniques with the MetaVue so you can see how to use that. And I'll have Harry kind of walk through some of this. It's the COLORx software and kind of show the features and how it works in conjunction with the software. So go ahead, Harry, if you want, and we'll walk through some examples.
Thank you, Tim. And from that poll question, it seems like everyone is semi-familiar with the Benjamin Moore software. So as you know, the first thing you need to do for color matching is to go down to the lower left, click on color matching so that your controls now change to what you need for color matching. And for those of you that may not be as familiar, the two buttons are grayed out until you enter a sample ID and a product. And the sample ID is just a tag, some tag you're putting on the sample so that you can store it, you can find it later, and most retailers do some type of color description in here. I'm not that creative, so I'm just going to call this MetaVue test for the first time. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to put it in product 549, which, if you know, is the Regal Select Eggshell Finish, Regal Select Eggshell Finish, which is very popular. Once those two items are there, now the Measure Sample button becomes active. And when I click on it, I'm going to bring up the targeting screen for the MetaVue. As Tim slides stuff under, in the old days, you know, especially with the CF57, because you had to put it in the holder and then close the holder up against the instrument, you couldn't really know what exactly you were looking at. And obviously, on a color strip, this is not what you want to be measuring. You want to make sure you're only measuring the color. And with this instrument, now you can easily see off the camera feed that you're measuring just that color. Now, it looks large. That circle is 12 millimeters, which is the same as the large aperture on the eye view. So, view with an eye view, the larger size, that's what this represents. And the recommended way to do this is to always leave this on the large/auto. Tim will explain why in a minute. But from here, all you need to do is click Measure, let the program do its measurement. And then to the right of that, you'll see the color that it's ready to send back to COLORx for formulation. Now, I don't know if you remember seeing this. This was called Spring Rain. So when I click OK here, this should look familiar to people familiar with our program. And then you just click Formulate. And if I go to closest PM color, I'm going to see that Spring Rain is the color that we measured. So everything's working fine there. Just a quick word about closest Benjamin Moore colors. So this larger area of color is a color representation of what your spectro is reading. And then these 5 smaller squares are representations of these 5 Benjamin Moore colors. So we give you the 5 closest, and usually the top one is the one that should be the closest. Now, sometimes you may look at a color and then you see the 5 here and they're not even close. And that's because we're telling you these are the closest colors in our system to what was measured, and they may or may not be close to what you're actually measuring. It all depends on where we're falling in color space. But in this case, we measured 723. We also have 723. So if I just slide this over, this is my prescription. If I did a color match, I didn't know what it was. But if you know it's 723, or if your customer brings in something, you don't even know what it is, and you measure it, and you look at these, and you show them this color, for example, and they say, yeah, that's a great match. This is, if I click on this, which I will in a second, this is going to be the actual prescription for 723 in the product code that you used. And why that's important is these colors are shot up and they're evaluated by people in light boxes here in Flanders so that we know that color is going to match. So I'm just going to click on this and you'll see that I get the prescription for 723 in 549. And if you're not familiar with also known as, we have a lot of colors that were known as something else at some point, even currently. Clicking on this tells you that this color is also the same as BT18. Now, unless you've been around as long as I have, you may not even recognize this number. Our color system, I started in 85, and this color system was current up until 87. It was called Moormatic 2. Well, a lot of these colors were transferred over to the next system, which is Moormatic 3, which was replaced by Color Preview, and which came back as the classic colors. So this color was carried over, and it's just telling you that this color and Spring Rain are the same exact color, okay? And that's really all I want to show you on this. So Tim, we're going to go to another color match, right? So we're going to start
Sure.
another.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to just type in sample because I'm not very creative, as I mentioned.
So that'll be a quiz question later, right, Harry? Moromatic, is that what you said?
We used to call it Mom 2, Mom 3, very homey.
Okay.
Moromatic.
Wow. Okay.
All right.
Well,
so
that does date you. But anyways, some of our samples that we have, and I think it's what we really want to do is let's take something like that was a color card, which is we know that's your competitors bringing in their colors rather than going to fan deck match. I'm always a big proponent to measure what they bring in. One of the classic ones we had as an example was the person had it on their windowsill for a couple weeks. And sure enough, that color they brought in, they measured it, or they went into their fan deck match, the competitive color, mixed it up, and then put their finger in the paint and compared it to the card she brought in. Well, the problem is that card sat in the windowsill for 2 weeks, faded, and she didn't like it that much at the time, but that fading, she now likes that color, and of course it doesn't match because instead of going the custom matching route, you just went to the fan deck route, and again, it doesn't match because of that fading color. So those are things why if they bring a sample in, we want you to measure it because that's what you're comparing it to right there is what they have in their hand. And again, that's it's important. So when we do things that are not typical paint cards, we can bring in a sample like this. And so if I show this piece of fabric, it has multiple colors in it. This is typical where they're saying, boy, how do I get that, I'd like to have that green sample. Well, the technology of this instrument, and with the large aperture, because one of the things I could do is simply just come over here, grab the aperture, go down to a size that fits this green, click on the spot I want to measure. And so, again, click on the spot I want to measure, and then off I go. But the real technology of the MetaVue is it's able to do what's called Smart Spot. And that means I'm going to take a measurement. If I see multiple colors, I'll separate them out. I'm also going to take away any of the shadowing, the peaks, the valleys, the fabric interwoven material. All of those things I'm going to take away in the large aperture. So when I click on measure, it now pulls the image out. It sees multiple colors and separates them, but also it takes away any of those inconsistencies that are part of the color. So in this green here, it took away any of that kind of fabric, that interwoven material, the orange here, and it also pulled in this dark brown, which is just this outline, for the fabric. So really what it's doing is it's looking at the pixels that are inside this image and separating out the colors. So the fact that it didn't pull out a yellow there lets me know that there wasn't enough pixels for it to separate. But in this case here, I can simply click on that green and then walk through and formulate that just like we did before. And so just as Harry had shown, but I can also go back, I'm going to go back to this and hit, what was it, 549, is that it?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. And then hit measure sample. Again, if I wanted to, and let's say I wanted that yellow dot, okay, I can take my aperture down to very small, and then I can click on that circle. And one of the things you'll notice is inside the circle, I've got some of that yellow or some of the outline of that spot. Well, that's going to be included because the technology with this, and I'm going to switch out to another sample, is if I take this soap sponge holder, you'll notice here, it looks like spaghetti, but it's really it's just a plastic foam. But it's got dark blues in here and light and medium blues. But it's this blue I want right here that I want to match to. So if I click on measure sample, that again pulls that image out, separates out the colors, and then I just pick and choose. Now, could I have taken this, you know, here's my light blue, that's what I wanted. If I go back, let's go back to remeasure. Could I have done this and taken it here, gone down, and tried to find that light blue spot? Yeah, but that's not really the color I'm looking for. So it's things like with this large aperture, small aperture, we want you to use this large aperture as much as possible. So here's even a sample, very small sample. And then if we kind of put that pen tip in.
That's the tip of a pen.
Yeah. And so this is a really small sample. And we know that most people would say, well, I should take my aperture, go down to a size that fits that, click on the spot and measure. But what you're doing there is really, it's just a spectral, which is fine. It probably would be a good match due to the fact that it's just a color card, a little chip. But if it was a piece of wall from behind the wall plate that they came and brought that in and you took a little chip off, place it underneath the spectro, there's going to be some texture. There might be some flaws in that material. I would always say measure the large. And because we're separating color, okay, if that chip has enough color in those pixels, it's going to separate the gray background, which the matte comes with it, and then also the green. So in this case here, it was enough color to show that the separation was there. If I were to move this thing and only have, and I'll go back to remeasure, let's say it was just this amount right there, okay? Now, if I click on measure, is there enough green there to show a separation? Those are the things that, as I'm using it, it's not taking forever to measure. It's a little bit slower than the iView, but even that, it still had enough to pull that green in. And so that's what the technology of Smart Spot, pulling the image out, separating the shadow, the peaks, the valleys, the imperfections of that sample you bring in, use it, always use the large aperture. Here's another example that's pretty typical of what happens. Back to remeasure. This is a piece of stucco, okay? Meaning whatever, you know, that's what your iView or the CF sees. It sees that peaks and valleys, the dark spot behind it. We tell you to average it. So you take a measurement, rotate the sample. Well, guess what? You still always have that dark spots inside the film. So you as a colorist always knew, oh, stucco, I better back the formula off 25% and then bring it up. In fact, it's probably what you do to most things that have texture. The MetaVue, I'm telling you, is able to pull the image out, formulate to that color, and really get close on a first match basis. I don't need to average this anymore. Let it pull the image out and then go and formulate. Again, it's awesome that this instrument has that technology. You know, here's another example. I mean, I've been doing samples, trying to find things that don't work. You know, this is a piece of countertop. And so somebody wants this light brown, right? Well, what I, you know, maybe, again, if I said, oh, I got to try and get that light brown, I can't find a spot good enough that won't include something else in it. So here's what I say, go to large, click on measure. Maybe there's enough light brown in there that it separates it out. I can select it and off I go. If it doesn't give me enough light brown, maybe I can rotate the sample again and go that route. In this case here, it got me the light brown and off I go to match that. So the instrument has the capability of really doing really small spots, and then even spots we can't see, because of that imaging, I can separate the colors out. So just as much as the old system, the new one does it in a lot of different ways, but it gets us that color we need, especially if you start talking about samples where, you know, they like the pillow that goes on the couch, but it's all kinds of different colors. They want that little color out of it. That's where the samples really can be quite difficult, you know, where you might have said before, I need the sample the size of a quarter. You know, not anymore. You can take a little paint chip, like we said, off the back of a plate, to be able to do that. So let me just show you a couple of examples. In fact, I'll go to camera here because a lot of the work I've done over the years, over the last 18 months. I mean, here's an example. There's that green, yellow, and red, green, orange, and yellow of that piece of fabric. What I want to show too real quick is the old days, you had to worry about what was behind that color, right? That light goes through it. Whatever's on the back side of that yellow is going to be part of the color. Not anymore. Pull the image out, separate it, and off we go. You know, here's that countertop. The light brown, the dark brown came through. In quick ways. Here's a sample of, you know, piece of fabric with the dots in it. And so if I kind of switch back over to the color measurement, I want to show you, again, another technique that's happening. If this is my sample, again, now that you've heard the Tim talk, you'd say, oh, well, just measure large and let it go. Well, if there's enough in there to separate that red, then off I go. But if it doesn't, and I don't know if this one will or not, we'll see, it did separate it. So one of the earlier measurements, it didn't, not a problem. All I do is click on remeasure. Then I can go here, pinpoint it, and get it into that circle. Again, now I'm kind of that red of the old eye view, where I might want to back that off a little bit because, again, the texture and everything else. So the real technology is this Smart Spot large aperture, okay? Are there any questions or anything? No? Okay. So again, examples like that. Let's go back to the camera. Just want to, again, show you some of that stuff. You know, here's an example. There's that foam holder, you know, it holds the soap in the bathtub. But again, it's an inspiration item. They bring it in, they like that light blue. But through the MetaVue, I can separate those out. So that light blue is the match to it. The dark blue is the eye view. So I took the eye view, put that underneath, and measured, and said, okay, let's formulate that. And that's exactly what you would expect. There's no way that I can separate out the light from the dark of this sponge, and the eye view went and gave you exactly what we would have seen before. Here's that stucco. This was the one, just the stucco, and off we go. You know, these are the things that we've had great success with that we haven't been able to do before. So another technique that I think is important with the MetaVue is, let's say someone brings in a large object like a board or something else that needs to be measured.
Yeah, I got it. Over here.
Oh, okay. Oh, I need to go to camera, yeah. Sorry.
So the instrument can actually turn on its side. You can like hold the whatever
the object
up, and then this is actually also a measurement button.
So if I then switch out of here, now instead of having to find a third hand or a second person, I can just click that green button and it automatically measures. And all these features of cleaning and measurement buttons and things like that we've learned from the eye view and the other instruments. So your suggestions have come through and said, hey, I need something that does this. And so we make those changes. But the color technology, the measurement technology of this instrument, in my experience, has really been quite superior to what we've had before. So
anybody have any questions?
We can do another poll at this time and just kind of find out how many times a day are you using your current color match device?
So how many times per day do you use your color match device? Yeah, it's interesting that, again, in the paint world, we know that the formula books or the prescriptions are, you know, probably a good number of what you're doing, but we know that people bring in inspiration items to measure, and off we go. Perfect.
80% or something.
Okay. So yeah, so again, the numbers are what we would think. The 20 1 to 10, half the group, the others 11 to 20. So, you know, Benjamin Moore does paint. That's what they do, and the numbers indicate that exactly. And they know that they can bring samples in to have you match. It's not just one cut. You know, there's only 5 colors available to me. They know that there's thousands and whatever I bring in too. So that's a good question.
If I could just jump in a second, Tim.
Sure.
All these retailers, you know, if you couldn't get a good match in the past, you usually would walk over with that sample the customer gave you and try to pull a colored strip off your stadium display. Or sometimes you could just tell them, sorry, I can't even measure that. Now you're going to be able to do a lot more. You won't have to turn some people away. There's a lot more flexibility with the MetaVue in terms of matching colors that you couldn't do in the past.
Yeah, that's it, and I think that's it too. Don't be afraid. One of the biggest features is this right here. You know, I can slide it underneath there. I can see exactly what I'm measuring, and then I'm not afraid to make sure I've got the right sample. And the best part is that when I formulate and I get a good result, I'm not afraid to use the instrument, as opposed to, well, I better go find the closest color match because I don't trust what the instrument gives me. So that was one of the bigger features, was being able to visualize it, and then the final result is it's a pretty good match. That was the kicker there for most of the stores that tested this. So we've had it out there with the COLORx software for about 3 months now. I also have on the line with us, I have Jeff Rokamp. He's our head of sales for the retail group. Jeff, I know that one of the questions being asked, and I haven't thrown it out, is what's the cost for the MetaVue with the Benjamin Moore software? Can you answer that for us?
Sure, Tim, thanks. And thanks to the team. The cost, the standard cost for the MetaVue is $4,995, but X-Rite is offering a $500 trade-in for your old device. So that would get you down to $44.95. And then this summer, for the next 60 days, we are having a summer promotion where we are offering an additional $250. That will move down to $42.45 once you take the $500 trade-in and the summer promo. So it's a great time. Take advantage of the MetaVue this paint season, and we're giving you a little bit of an incentive to do that. One thing I wanted to mention, and I think it's very valid, Harry brought it up, is as we've been demoing and presenting this device to retailers, then a really big wow factor is when they see that the ability to measure that small 2 millimeter size aperture, that sample size, simply because they're, like Harry mentioned, they're turning people away, they're walking out the door, or they're spending a tremendous amount of time and labor in matching that by eye or trying to get it because their current instrument cannot measure that. So we don't want people to walk out the door. We want you to be able to measure everything that people bring in. And once again, it's a great device, and we appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Jeff. So we want to kind of leave you guys with, how to get a hold of X-Rite for support, and how to get a hold of Benjamin Moore. The X-Rite support number is the 800-572-4626. We've got people first line or first level support, which usually answer most of the questions. But if it gets into a little more difficult, then the option 3 gets you first level. Option 5 would get you Jason and I. But another great way is just through email. If you've got a question that, just like this, we're up here doing webinars. Nobody's helping the customer from that. But you can call or email us at MR Support. That's where certainly we can help out there also. And then Harry, you want to talk about your support? That'd be great.
This number here goes to our first level support. It's actually in COLORx under help and technical support. and it's the 800 number, 800-809-9213, as you see on the screen. And that connects you into Flanders. We have 5 people here and 1 up in Montreal for first level support. If they can't help you, then it'll usually get bounced back to me, and I have a new colleague of about 3 months. So we provide second level support. And that's, most people that have been around long enough and needed to call know that we can get their problems resolved.
Great, thanks, Harry. So with that, are there any other questions? We certainly appreciate your time, everybody. If there's anything that you need, certainly you can send the emails. We'll answer those questions afterwards. We didn't get through them all today. But again, from X-Rite, Tim, I say thank you. Jason.
Thanks, everyone.
Harry.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks. Again, you'll get an email with the link to this, and we appreciate everybody's support.
Yeah. So this marks the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for joining. If we weren't able to get to your question, we'll follow up with you. And like Tim said, you'll receive an email with a link to the recording. Thanks again for joining, everyone. Have a great day.